What's up, guys? Marcellus Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, here to educate you on health, fitness, and social well-being. And today I want to give you guys 5 tips to help you coach yourself or clients through a bad training session. Now, when I say bad training session, I'm simply defining that as a session where something went wrong or things didn't go the way that you expected them to. Mind you, I'm a big believer in the model that my boy Sean Noriega preaches, which is no bad days, meaning I believe there's always something to take from every session that we go through, whether it was a great session or a more subpar session. But with that being said, the reality is every single one of us at some point or another has or will experience what we consider a bad training session. Just a session that didn't go the way we wanted to, right? That applies to everyone across the board, whether you're a beginner, an intermediate, an advanced lifter, whether you have great genetics for powerlifting, subpar genetics for powerlifting. It's something that's very universal. And it's something that I feel like isn't talked about quite enough. And I believe the reason for that is the fact that we currently live in a climate, as far as like not just powerlifting, but training as a whole, where people like to show their highlights, right? And really that's social media as a whole. People like to show the highlights of their life, not necessarily the downs or the rough patches that they're going through. So it's one of these things where when you have lifters who only want to show their PRs or their best sets, and you have coaches who only ever want to show the good things their lifters are doing and maybe not some of the harder times, it's just one of these things where I feel like it might not be as glamorous to talk about like bad sessions or how to get a client through a bad session, but I believe that's something that's very important. You guys know that here on this channel, I try to be very transparent. I try to show you guys everything when it comes to my training, the good, the bad, everything in between. And even on my Instagram, you guys know that I never shy away from posting like a failed top set or a top set that moved harder than what I wanted to, because I believe that it's important for everyone to see that this is a part of the lifting experience. It's something that happens. It's something that you should expect. Not that you should expect to always have difficult sessions, but know that it can happen and it often will happen. So that's why I wanted to make this video and just take you guys through 5 tips that I like to go through with all of my clients whenever they're dealing with a bad session or something bad happens during the session, whatever it may be. So with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, guys, so tip number 1 is going to be to let your client feel how they feel. Or if you're coaching yourself, let yourself feel how you feel. If something goes wrong with the session, right? Maybe the top set didn't move the way you wanted it to. Maybe you didn't hit as much weight on your tops as what you wanted to. Maybe your form wasn't great. Whatever it is you're upset about, let yourself feel how you feel, because it's very important to understand that oftentimes we will almost guilt trip ourselves for feeling bad, in the sense of we get so caught up on this idea of like oh, always be positive, always look on the bright side, there's always a silver lining, to where we sometimes don't just let ourselves be upset. And that's okay, especially from the standpoint of if you're coaching somebody else. Obviously, if you're coaching yourself, this applies, but it's very important when you're coaching somebody else, because you don't want to invalidate their feelings. And understand that if a set doesn't go the way your client wants, right, and they're upset about it, it's not because they're soft, it's not because they're mentally weak, but it's because they care. They're actually invested in the training. They're invested in what they're doing. And very often it's because they don't want to feel like they're disappointing you as the coach, right? So don't invalidate your client's feelings. And if you're coaching yourself, don't invalidate your own feelings. Take the time to just let yourself be upset. If you're coaching someone else, let your client know that, hey, it's okay that you're upset about this. You should be upset about this because, hey, maybe we could have executed the top set a little bit better, or maybe, you know, we failed a PR that we were building towards. Whatever it may be, it's okay to simply let them feel how they feel. Don't come in immediately trying to throw a bunch of like positive rhetoric at them off the bat. Don't immediately try to dive into like, okay, well, what happened? What's wrong and why? Like, just, you know, after they explain kind of what happened, how they feel, like that's the thing. Let them know like, hey, this is okay. This type of stuff happens. Don't suppress how you're feeling, because ultimately, before you can get to these next steps where you kind of start to break down what went wrong and why, it's going to be way smoother if you've already kind of let them get some stuff off their chest, vent a little bit, versus if you kind of suppress them and then try to do that, because they're not going to want to hear what you have to say. They're not going to be very objective. And even when you're coaching yourself, you're not going to be very objective with yourself if you're still kind of holding in and letting your feelings towards whatever it is fester. So step number 1 is to simply let yourself or your client feel whatever they feel. All right, guys, so step number 2, after you allow your client to feel whatever they feel, or you're letting yourself feel whatever you feel about whatever went wrong, is to actually evaluate, okay, what went wrong and why. Once again, if let's say the top set didn't go quite the way we wanted to, well, what went wrong? Did we not hit quite the amount of weight that we thought we were going to hit for the top set? Did our form break down a little bit? Did we fail the top set? Let's evaluate exactly what went wrong. And from there, we need to evaluate why it went wrong. And with the why, this is so crucial. Break down if it was something that was within your client's control or not, because that distinction has to be made. Oftentimes, clients and we ourselves as lifters will beat ourselves up for variables that we honestly had no control over, right? It's like, maybe it's something like, maybe you have a client who just had a child, they have a newborn, and they had to wake up in the middle of the night because their baby was crying. Well, what was the client gonna do? Just like ignore their child? No, I gotta get my sleep, put my headphones on and go back to bed and just let the baby cry, or they have a significant other. Oh no, you handle it. I got my RP9 top set tomorrow. That's just not gonna go down very well for most people. So things like that happen. Maybe you had to work an extra shift at work that you weren't expecting to because you had to cover somebody else. Obviously, unless you're trying to get fired, you're probably gonna tell your boss, okay, yeah, I've got it, right? Unless you have some option or some choice to say that, oh no, I can't cover it. But the point is, sometimes outside circumstances happen that aren't within our control. So it's very important to evaluate what went wrong and then why. There's a big difference between, hey, I wasn't able to get a whole lot of sleep because I had to work an extra shift last night, versus I didn't get a whole lot of sleep because I chose to stay up playing Fortnite or whatever game that people are playing nowadays, right? So evaluating if it was something within your control or not is very, very important. If it's something that was not within your control, within your client's control, it's important to let your client know that, hey, this was not your fault. There wasn't anything you could really do about it. Sometimes you just have to, play with the hand that we're dealt for that day due to our circumstances. Now, if it was something that was in your client's control, it's important to address that, hey, listen, yes, this happened. It sucks that it happened, but take responsibility and ownership of why it happened, and let's figure out what we can do going forward. And that's what's going to lead into step number 3. All right, guys, so point number 3 is going to be determine what you can learn from the scenario and then make a game plan moving forward. So once again, let's say that you determine that it's something that's not within your control. Like, maybe your fatigue's a lot higher because you aren't able to get as much sleep due to the fact that you're just working way longer hours. Well, in that case, the game plan is going to be, since we can't get more sleep because we can't have control of our work schedule right now, let's make some adjustments to the programming. Maybe let's scale the volume back a little bit or the intensity back a little bit, because it's going to make far more sense to try to get more out of doing a little bit less than trying to keep doing the amounts of volume and work that we've been doing that we now know we clearly can't recover from because we can't get adequate sleep, or because we can't eat quite as much because we don't have time in the day to eat quite as much, whatever it may be, right? Now, if it is something that was within their control, like they just chose to stay up late, that's when the game plan needs to come down to, okay, well, what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen anymore? It's not enough to just be like, oh, well, I didn't go to bed at a good time. You know that's the problem, but what's going to be the game plan going forward so that no longer keeps happening? And it's important to establish this game plan, especially if you're coaching a client, so that way they know that, okay, this is the plan, this is what coach expects of me, and they'll hold themselves accountable to that. It's, once again, the rhetoric matters. There's a big difference between just telling your client, okay, well, just make sure you get more sleep, versus asking, okay, well, why are you staying up late? What's going on? Are you stressed out about something? Are you staying up late reading or playing a video game or whatever because you're stressed out? Figure out what's going on with them and then evaluate a plan. If it really is something as simple as like, oh, I just kind of lose track of time when I'm doing whatever, have them set a schedule. Hey, have an alarm go off at this time so that you're in bed by 9 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever it may be, right? And it's not in the sense that you're, their parent giving them a curfew, but you're forming a game plan and letting them know that, hey, if you want to be successful, we need to be on top of these variables that are within our control. And if we're simply being lazy with it, let's form a plan that will hold you accountable. And if it comes down to you coaching yourself, it's the same thing. Write it in your notes, your journal, set your alarms, do whatever you need to, and be honest with yourself as far as what you want out of your training. And understand that, okay, if I want to maximize my training and maximize my results, then I don't want this thing that went wrong today to become a constant habit, right? That's another thing. If this is something that's a reoccurring habit, then you definitely make a game plan to address what's going on to break that habit. But even if something that's only happened once, evaluating what happened and then making a game plan so that it doesn't happen as frequently will keep you from having more bad sessions for the exact same reason, which is obviously very, very important. All right, guys, so after you've gone through, evaluating what went wrong, making a game plan so that you can try to avoid that same scenario happening again, step number 4 is going to be to actually take the time to evaluate the positives, right? Take a look at what you can learn from the situation and make it into a positive. So let's say that maybe something on the top set went wrong due to technique. It's like, okay, I didn't do this great technique wise, but you know what? The rest of this held up pretty well. So look at the positives in terms of what you did well, and that's just going to help you or help your client feel better about what didn't go as well. Now, mind you, we're not focusing on what we did well to kind of just ignore or negate what didn't go well, but it's just more of a balance, right? Being objective does not mean being biased against ourselves. In the same way it doesn't mean being biased for yourself. It means looking at everything collectively as a whole. Okay, yeah, you know what? in the squat, I didn't really keep my back as tight as what I could have. Oh, but you know what? I did a really good job of making sure that I'm driving the knees forward and kind of, keeping a more stacked position with my core. So that's beautiful. So if that's the case, then all I have to really work on is, okay, if I get that upper back tight, that's going to allow me to like bring everything together. So taking the time to evaluate the positives is great. Or let's say it was a top set, right? Like for example, I just had a client who tried to go for a PR double this past weekend and he didn't get it. And I told him it's okay to be upset about that. And we evaluated what can we do to lock in our form so that next time we can get that PR double. But then I reminded him, but hey, you know what? Hitting that for even a single was an outright PR for you. And that's very, very important, right? And I even explained to him that, hey, you've been hitting bench PRs like this entire block. So this one day, this one time where you missed it doesn't negate all that hard work you put into, but it's about, okay, well, what can we do to keep this trend going? But things like that go a long, long way, because sometimes we can get so caught up in the negativity of what just happened that we aren't being objective with all the good things that also happened during that session. So it's very important to take the time to simply evaluate the positives and see what you can learn from the situation so that you can even make the rest of the week more positive. And that's what's going to lead into point number 5. Alright guys, and point number 5, which is the final point of this video, is to shift your perception in order to make the rest of the training session and the rest of the training week more productive. And all this comes down to, guys, is simply, once again, being honest with yourself in the sense of, okay, yeah, I messed up on this one part, but looking at all the positives. But beyond that, it's remembering to look at the big picture. Understand that one bad set does not ruin your entire session. Understand that one bad session does not ruin your entire training week, and even one subpar week does not have to ruin your entire block. And heck, I'll go so far as to say that one subpar training block doesn't have to ruin the entire macro cycle, like the entire training cycle, the full series of blocks you have leading to whatever your goal is. Now, like I said, we should be evaluating these things if we are having multiple bad sessions, like within a week, or multiple bad training weeks, multiple bad training blocks. You want to evaluate why that's happening, what's going on. But hopefully, if you're a relatively competent lifter and you're coaching yourself, or if you're working with a coach, you guys already have things in place to kind of evaluate the data, the fatigue, to see what adjustments you need to make. And that's kind of part of what we talked about earlier in this video, right, is evaluating what's going on and why, what the game plan is going to be going forward so that this doesn't keep occurring. But understand that even if you're doing everything you're supposed to, you can have the greatest programming ever, you can have like the most disciplined mindset ever where you're staying on top of your sleep, your food, all these controllable variables, right? Something at some point is going to happen that causes you to have a more subpar training session. It's just part of the game. And I believe that shifting your perception helps so much with this. And when I say shift your perception, I don't just mean like, hey, think positively, or remember that, hey, like I told my client, that, hey, this one session doesn't take away from all the great work you put in, but I mean shifting your perception in the sense of knowing that every session is just not going to be great, right? And it's not that you should expect your sessions to be awful, but it's being realistic and knowing that it can happen is a possibility. And in forming a game plan, like having these points that we've talked about, where you're going to really think about, okay, well, if this does happen, here's how I'm going to approach it mentally, really does take you far, versus being somebody where you're just so caught up on the highs of your training to where whenever something doesn't go the way you want, you just take it really hard and just hits you really, really hard, which is, to me, the most common thing that happens with clients. If a client is kind of like used to having to work around stuff or deal with setbacks or whatever, they tend to actually build some resilience with dealing with, issues, setbacks, whatever it may be. But whenever it's a client who's used to things going their way because they usually are on top of their variables, or maybe they are genetically gifted or blessed, they seem to be the ones that take it really hard when something goes wrong. So simply shifting the perception of letting them know that, hey, this isn't so much like a bad thing or a setback, it's just part of the flow of training, which is kind of an up and down thing anyway. But what we're trying to do is make sure that the overall trend is heading upward. So it's like, it's okay if we're moving like this, so long as over time we're still getting higher and higher, right? Unless we're just doing this and staying in the same spot. That's more of an issue, obviously. But just taking the time to help your client shift their perception, to view their training in a more holistic way, where it's not just about one session, but it's about looking at everything collectively, keeping that big picture in mind. Or if you're coaching yourself, doing the same thing for yourself goes such a long, long way. And I feel like even, like I said, the points we've laid out here goes such a long way, because you're setting yourself up for success, because you're preparing for when things may not seem as successful. You've got a game plan for how you're going to approach it and get better and build from that subpar training session. So that's really the whole purpose of this video, guys, is to help you guys remember that, you know what, you're going to have some crappy sessions. You're going to have some sessions that you're not happy with. But so long as you know how to approach it, which isn't just it's not ignoring it, it's not acting like it doesn't happen, It's not just being angry about it and just staying in that place of disappointment. It's about evaluating, okay, what happened, why, what can I do to be better? And still, at the end of the day, like I said, point number one, letting yourself feel how you feel about it. If anything, use those feelings as your motivator to keep coming back and doing better. Because it sucks, man. When you fail a top set or when things don't go the way you want, it doesn't feel good. But we shouldn't just ignore that or try to hide it with some pseudo positive attitude where it's like, well, I'm always happy, things is already good to go, like things will get better. Like, no, it sucks, and it's okay that it sucks, but what are you gonna do to overcome that? And hopefully this video helps to give you guys a little bit more insight into what you can do to help you with just that. So yeah, that's it for the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, go and leave a comment down below, let me know what you did. If you're not, leave a comment down below, let me know what can be better. Like the video, share, subscribe. Keep it simple, specific, scientific. I'll catch you guys later.